7 trillion. Senator Obama is a piker by comparison. His costs are only $2.7 trillion, partially because he's not planning to make all the Bush tax cuts permanent, in particular the ones that affect very upper class taxpayers. That's my characterization of them, not necessarily theirs. Would not be extended under the Obama tax cuts. Instead, he would allow those people to have tax increases take effect, but for the middle and lower income taxpayers, he would extend the tax cuts. So his tax cut cost is only $1.1 trillion. He basically would do the same thing to the AMT that Senator McCain would do. He has a tax credit for something called making work pay, which I'm not sure of the details on, at $700 billion. He has other tax cuts of $1 trillion, and then his revenue raisers are about $1.2 trillion. But you can see in either of these cases, if I said to you, we have a deficit problem over the next 10 years, that is, the deficit is going to continue to exist over the next 10 years, if you expected that what would happen is that somebody would suggest on the revenue side what it is that we could do to get rid of that deficit, which would mean raising people's taxes, not cutting people's taxes, I don't think you're going to find it here, because in both of these cases, they just make that 10-year deficit outlook worse. They don't make it better. But if they were suggesting specific things on the spending side in order to more than offset this, of course, that could still be something that would have an effect in terms of reducing the deficit over the next 10 years. So here are the commitments that have been made by the campaigns to inflict specific pain and cut specific programs. I have them listed. Oh gosh, did I not fill any in? That's because there aren't any. What you see is you see comments like Senator McCain's advisors said something like, return to 1990s spending controls, whatever that means. Now, one of the things that actually led to balancing the budget in the late 1990s was that the economy grew very quickly. So that's sort of like saying return to the economic growth of the late 1990s. Well, if we knew how to do it, we'd do it. And then there's talk about earmarks. And then I suppose in Senator Obama's case, you could certainly say that that leaving Iraq and Afghanistan would be would result in a reduction in terms of the amount of money that's being spent. But nobody is saying, for example, I want to cut Medicare in the following way. I think the Medicare prescription drug benefit is too expensive. We should just repeal it. I think that we should actually raise the age in which people could receive Medicare and Social Security benefits to 70. There'd be political suicide for you. None of those things are things that we have seen so far in the presidential campaign, and there's nothing that I've seen in past presidential campaigns which leads me to the conclusion that that's the kind of specific detail that we're going to end up with. So we basically have suggestions of cutting taxes and no suggestions of any way to control spending, with the possible exception of this discussion of earmarks, which is, in the first place, a relatively small amount of money, and in the second place, doesn't necessarily reduce the deficit. It may just mean that the president and the executive branch is controlling how money gets spent, as opposed to the legislative branch controlling how money gets spent. So those of you who are watching the presidential campaign, I encourage you to keep your eyes and ears open for how it is that things seem to add up relative to where we already are, because we have not seen, and I don't mean to be picking on Senator McCain and Senator Obama, I can't remember, with the exception of Ross Perot, when the last presidential candidate was who sort of ran on a platform of the pain that he was going to inflict on people, or she was going to inflict on people when they were elected president. Okay, so that brings us to the transition. The President's fiscal year 2010 budget. Now, here's a kind of funny thing that happens in presidential election years, is that the budget